Hello, everyone. This is Mark Plaster, Senior Executive Editor of Emergency Physicians Monthly, and you're listening to EP Talk, the place where emergency physicians, aka ER docs, come to talk about all things important to us. And today is kind of a special opportunity for me because I get a chance to talk to two of the most important guys in my life, my two sons, and Graham Plaster, my oldest, is a graduate of the Naval Academy. You can see that diploma and sword over his shoulder if you're watching the video. And my second son, Logan, was for 15 years the managing editor of Emergency Physicians Monthly. And each of them have their own perspective. Graham is the vice president of TDX, a government contractor. I'll let him tell a little bit more about what that does. And Logan is the communications director for Startup Health, a healthcare startup accelerator. Graham, give me the thumbnail, correct me of what exactly you're doing with TDX, and then we'll move on, and then we'll give Logan a chance to do the same.
Sure. So TDX is a medium-sized government contracting company headquartered in Alaska. And I represent the company out on the East Coast, close to Washington, D.C., and I specifically focus on the national security space and the intelligence community. TDX has a wide range of services for the government that range from construction to hospitality to intel analysis and some really interesting projects that we're working on. But in addition to that role, I'm also the CEO of a startup I started a few years ago called the Intelligence Community, Inc., which you can find out about if you go to theintelligencecommunity.com or if you go on LinkedIn and join the LinkedIn group called The Intelligence Community. But a lot of what I do is consulting on defense innovation programs and emerging technology for the federal government and the defense and intel space. So there are a lot of projects I'm working on about that, and I have a lot of thoughts swirling about what's going on with national security as it relates to this pandemic. So I'm looking forward to talking to both of you from that perspective.
Okay, and Logan, what's going on with Startup Health? Tell us just a thumbnail about Startup Health.
Sure. Great to be on EP Talk. I love the EPM community. Startup Health, so I'm the media director at Startup Health and the editor of Startup Health magazine, which you can subscribe to for free at startuphealth.com/magazine. But Startup Health invests in healthcare entrepreneurs around the world who are committed to achieving really audacious, what we call health moonshots. And what I mean by that is we've invested in about 325 companies from 25 countries, and we cohort them into these big goals like improving access, reducing cost, radically improving children's health, women's health, and then we really push them towards a kind of radical collaboration. And so I work with these companies and I help them tell their stories, whether it's through print or through digital. And it's been a fascinating time to hear kind of the work that they're doing as it relates to this pandemic. So excited to be in the conversation.
It's great. Good deal. I kind of characterize my sons as the futurist, the practical, and myself as the cowboy. Because I'm the one that's always trying to get real about what's emergency physicians are always dealing with the reality of what's in front of us. Graham is looking what's going to be happening in the next 10 or 15 years. Logan is talking about the communication and is always always trying to bring me to the practical, but
I wasn't sure who was who in that situation, but
there's a little bit of all of those in all three of us.
I know.
Well, that's understandable.
As a middle child, I'll take it. Mr. Practical.
Well, there's some even though you both live generally in the Mid-Atlantic. I say generally because both of you travel a great deal. Graham, you really have more of a contact with the West Coast. You just came through last night or night before not last night, but night before last through Washington State from Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have a feel for what's going on the West Coast. Logan, your company is based in Manhattan, and so you have you're going back and forth and seeing all the challenges. And you've lived in New York, so you have the challenges of what's happening in big cities on the East Coast. And so I'll start with you, Graham, and ask you, what do you think? Talking about coronavirus, how is that? What do you feel? What's the vibe going on the West Coast? Are people panicked? Are they practical? When I say practical, are they think that this is being overblown? Are they worried? What's the feel you get out there?
Well, I mean, I was only out in Alaska for a week, and I can speak for, the small group of people that I was interacting with out there. Coronavirus hadn't reached Alaska until the last day before I left, and then they had one case. And we kind of looked at the barren, cold landscape of Alaska as being the last frontier for coronavirus. But no doubt it'll end up getting up there and spreading around like everywhere else. And the mentality is, I think, probably similar to a lot of other states, which is that, what do we have to do? How are we going to manage it? And a very practical approach as the people are up there. As I was coming through Washington State, I was a little surprised at how nonchalant the airport was in Seattle, given all of the talk from the East Coast about it being a kind of a higher concentration of cases. I didn't see a lot of face masks. I didn't see what looked like any kind of panic. And for the most part, people were pretty relaxed. And the airline was a little more empty than I'm used to. A lot of people were getting the upgrades and such, but I think we'll probably see a lot more empty planes flying in the next couple of weeks. But for now, what I'm seeing is a lot of people taking things in stride and trying to just be sensible.
That's amazing to me, actually. I think that the people on the West Coast would be more concerned, and you'd see everybody cleaning constantly and wiping, wiping surfaces down, particularly in an airport. I mean, with all the people passing through, I would think that people would be very concerned about it. So I'm a little surprised.
Yeah, Graham, all the companies that I work with are all pretty small as startups, and TDX is, how many employees are at TDX?
Several hundred. Yeah, and we're spread out all over the world.
So I'm curious just what the corporate response is. Have they sent people home to work or what?
Yeah, we're doing some of that. Obviously, some of the projects we're involved with, like construction and others, we are looking at ways that we can continue to, keep work going. If it's a situation where we can't do telework, if there's situations that we can do telework, we're looking at that. But I'm actually not in a good position yet to explain all the things that the company would be doing because we're still thinking about how we're going to adapt. I would say more broadly beyond TDX, what I've seen other corporations doing is the same thing that I would recommend to any company, which is have excellent communication with your people on a daily basis about what's going on. We've seen some excellent letters come out from corporate headquarters from all the different email lists that you've been on. I've seen, letters come out from Chick-fil-A, from Netflix, et cetera, that really lay out, this is how our company is handling things, and it's what I've told people is over communicate and keep a steady hand. And I think that that's going to give everybody a sense of peace as we kind of navigate through this. I think most people do have maybe a little bit of a secret feeling that maybe there's some overreaction happening. Certainly, when you look at the stockpiling of toilet paper, it seems a little bit like the misalignment with the actual problem. But on the other hand, the overreaction is, I think, useful as a dry run for maybe a more severe crisis that could come. And certainly, this could become a very severe crisis. So I don't want to minimize this crisis. Some people are dying, but I think we also need to, while we're having a conversation, a national and an international conversation about this, we need to contrast this pandemic with other enduring causes of death. And I know we've talked about opioid deaths, and the head of the World Health Organization had a speech yesterday that I heard that was really excellent, where he said, let's not forget about all the other diseases that people are dealing with all around the world. And he mentioned malaria and some other ones. Right. I think it would be very first world of us to look at this one and make this one the most important one, just because we're not paying attention to some of the other ones.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. being having kind of a dark humor as an ER doc, I saw something the other day I identified with and said, if your first reaction to panic is to buy toilet paper, you're not very good at panic. You need to improve your panic game. So,
it's
Logan,
a very first world response.
Logan.
I think to get back to your question, just kind of about the general response. Our community is one of healthcare startups, and so it's been really interesting to see, even though they're based in New York and San Francisco and around the world in these urban environments. From a practicality standpoint, they're typically remote workers, people who can easily work from WeWork, from home, whatever. So that practicality of it aside, it's a very interesting time for people in our industry because they see it as a catalyst to really finally embrace some of the remote care technologies that we've really needed.
Right. We've been talking about that for a long time, haven't we?
Yeah. In order to, I mean, true believers in telemedicine and in remote monitoring really believe that it will not only open up access, but actually lower costs in the end.
Yeah.
And maybe this is the thing to push it through. So you have a lot of companies who are really tripling down during this time. They're not taking a 2-week vacation. Even if they're not frontline health workers, they're saying this is my moment to really prove out. And what a lot of them are doing are just dramatically giving away everything that they do for free for the duration of the pandemic. And so we're seeing every day through my channels, I'm seeing another 3, 4, 5 companies just sort of drop the paywall and say everything I do is free for the duration of the pandemic, and maybe this will be the catalyst.
Do you see that creating a new business model, or you think that that's got to be some sort of pro bono period, and then they have to return to their original business model?
I just asked that question to a founder yesterday, and he was making a product free for the duration of the pandemic that would have made him could make him $1 million in a single contract, and so he's not going to make that. He's not going to make it a freemium model forever. But he is interested in getting the early clients and building up the base. So while it's not going to stay that way, there's certainly some business reasons to get the user base up.
Yeah. One of the things, it's anybody's guess, and I'm throwing it out there for your guess. How do you think this immediate, you use the term for the duration of the pandemic, that the World Health Organization called the Ebola or the swine flu like 6 months after it had really kind of tailed off. So the duration of the pandemic is something that is going to be hard to get our hands around. And
Sure.
So I ask you, in each of your, put your crystal ball in front of you and tell me what you think, Logan. How do you think this is going to play out? We're in Maryland. We're on a lockdown essentially, or
Yeah, the two things that I think are going to make this reasonably brief are that the numbers coming out of South Korea, where we're seeing they took it very seriously, they tested like crazy, and they're already seeing a dramatic drop in cases. And so the numbers seem optimistic if we take it seriously. And then coupling that with what I'm seeing in Baltimore, where I live, which is generally 95 out of 100 people seem to be taking it very seriously. Strangers on the street giving each other space, like really the whole city is kind of on lockdown. Mm-hmm. And so even though it hasn't really gotten here yet, we've only had one case in the city. So this Baltimore, as just one example, is successfully preemptively on lockdown. And so it seems like if we can ramp up those tests like South Korea has, it seems like maybe we can follow the same trend.
Graham, do you think that people are going to be cynical if it turns out that their area didn't really, what if we only end up with 400 or 500 cases and no deaths, or put it this way, predictable deaths among the elderly and the frail, which you could knock over with a slight wind. What do you think people will be cynical about it?
I think the opposite would happen. I think if we had a small number of cases, every single health organization and governmental organization that took lead on this, or made some sort of demand about action, will claim victory as a result. We'll look back and say, if we hadn't have done what we did and been as draconian as we were, then we would have had a bunch of cases. So this is a situation where if there's any cynicism that emerges, I think it'll be among the minority.
Interesting.
I agree. I agree completely. And it also just feeds into humanity's natural desire to just defend whatever course of action they took. It's like if you decide you're going to quarantine yourself and that's what's right, then you're going to write blog posts about why that's so important. And at the end, you're going to say that was definitely the right move.
Yeah.
Just our desire and ability to self-justify no matter what.
Well, that's true of politicians, and having been one a failed politician, I can tell you that that's actually the MO of politicians. But I'm actually talking about the folks who kind of walk through this, because the question I have is this going to actually change how we do things? For instance, we've now obviously we're going to go back to having March Madness, I hope. But are we going to have fewer large mass gatherings? Are people going to stay away from mass gatherings because of, well, I could get sick if I went to that football game or basketball game or play or whatnot? Or is that something that you think will be a societal trend moving away? My question is more general than just the group thing, but what things do you see or do you think will happen, and as a result of this, behaviors that will be adopted?
Well, I think there's a likely within a year or two, we've heard it said by some other commentators that this could become a seasonal coronavirus, just like
Right.
a seasonal flu or anything else.
Yep.
And so once it becomes normalized in our culture, and certainly once we get a vaccine, I think the fear would subside, even if the mortality rate stays the same, because as we talked about, there are other things that are much larger killers that we should be addressing.
Yeah, there's no doubt that part of this.
Go ahead.
Yeah, part of this is the fear of the unknown, no doubt.
Yeah. We don't
I
know
don't think there's.
what to expect.
I don't think there's been enough discussion, ironically, because there's been plenty of discussion about all of it, but enough discussion about the actual symptoms and recovery time for healthy individuals, right? We've talked a little bit about asymptomatic people. We've talked a lot about elderly people being vulnerable, or children not actually being that vulnerable. But for the people that we know that are getting it, it probably would be beneficial to have more interviews with people that are actually sick and saying, how are you feeling? What is this like? Because right now, the mass public response is as if this disease is some sort of really abnormally terrible disease.
Yeah.
And if this disease is similar to or less than the flu, I think that just time will probably reveal that, and first-person accounts of what's going on certainly would be helpful. But back to an earlier question that you asked to Logan, I'd like to address it, which is how is this pandemic going to change some things in the workplace? I think that it is actually a forcing function for implementing technological changes that have been around for a while. And this is just kind of, foot stomping what you already said, Logan, but also for the national security space, and also certainly for the government, because we've had technologies for a long time to do decentralized work and remote work and asynchronous meetings and things like that. And we've defaulted to traditional styles of work because, people are creatures of habit. And so this kind of a crisis forces us to look at our technologies, whether it's something like this with the GoToMeeting, our teleconference, and say, is this going to be enough for me going forward? Not only for when we have a crisis, but on a daily basis. and maybe we can actually eliminate a lot of our overhead and also at the same time de-risk our companies if there are viruses we want to avoid. And that leads to an interesting social phenomenon that I think is really ironic, which in the last couple of years, plenty of social critics have looked at the fact that we're all sitting on buses or metros or even at home looking at our devices, our laptops, our phones, our tablets, and we've become a lot less social. And yet the antidote for this current problem is social distancing. And you have to say, well, is this going to reinforce a negative trend that we're already seeing, which is that we've become more and more socially distant? I mean, we have social media, but really that's caused an inflation, I think, in depression among the youth, where they feel like there's constantly comparison, and there's constantly that dopamine hit of trying to look and see what the other person's doing and feeling left out. So social distancing as a kind of prescription for healing is ironic to me.
Yeah. Let's take 30 seconds here. We're gonna come back and grab this conversation some more while we take a break for our sponsors. Okay, everyone, we're back, and Graham's brought up a fascinating point, and I think that this is really kind of the almost the purpose of this discussion, because what we know has been blasted out there in the news. You can't, I mean, for crying out loud, you pick up your news feed, and the first 30 things there are related to the coronavirus. So it's not like we don't have information on the coronavirus, but I think that the question here is, what impacts is that going to have? Are they potentially positive? And I'll just start with an anecdote. We can't go anywhere for the most part. Everybody says stay at home. And guess what we did? We went out to have dinner with over at a friend's house the other day, and it was just 4 of us, and we had an incredible time. And so I think that while we naturally, at least maybe your generation naturally defaults to community by the internet or Facebook, or not. You don't do Facebook, but electronic media. I think there's a potential that when you don't have to go so far, you're not riding the bus or a car for an hour and a half every day, or 2 hours in some cases, that you might actually have more time. And there might be more of an opportunity for you to get to know the people who live next door to you. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely, as someone who teleworks, so Startup Health has, I forget what it is right now, about 20 employees, and everyone works remotely. There's a cluster in New York, a little cluster in Baltimore, a little cluster in San Francisco, but no one works in a central office. And the time that gives us back is it's really hard to put a value on it, because having commuted in New York City, where it's common to spend an hour each way in shoulder to shoulder subway traffic, to gain that time back for one's family is incredible. So I think that particularly, mid-sized companies, they're going to have this little experiment, and they're going to realize just how productive you can be when you're remote, and when you're dialing in, and when you're on a Zoom call, when you're on a GoToMeeting call, and they just might not go back. I don't know if the big companies are going to do it, but I mean, plenty have followed a results only work environment sort of model, like Best Buy. And yeah, I think to your point, it certainly is buying me more time with my family, and if I have enough time to be with my family, that means I have the margin to be friends with my neighbor, et cetera.
Yeah. Graham, you already work remotely, for the most part. I mean, obviously you've had a big change. You used to commute into Washington, hour and a half, hour 45 each direction. Now you're working from a home office. You're still traveling a great deal. But if that starts to close down, or people, even if they think twice about making, trips and say, how much of this can we do remotely? Do you think that'll be a positive impact? I think it's kind of a rhetorical question, but.
I think the strengths and weaknesses of telework are pretty obvious at this point. You know, you live and you die by the quality of your technology. You know, I'm actually rural enough where I depend on satellite internet, and if that is bad, then I can't do my work very well. And so there's all kinds of, you know, there's all kinds of reliance that we built up on technology that if those things break down, then we need to default back to traveling into the office, or we need to default back to kind of an older way of doing things with paper and pen. So to answer a couple different questions a couple different ways, one is that I think for these types of pandemics, we want two different characteristics, both in our families and our communities, but also in our politics, which is we want stability and we want agility. And you can't have much agility without having stability first. I think you can have lots and lots of stability without having agility. You can become big and rock solid. If you want to use kind of the image of a gymnast, I think a great gymnast has to have strong core, you know, has to have a lot of stability to keep sure footing in order to become agile. But you could have I don't know, sumo wrestler or something like that has great stability. And so when we're looking at trying to adapt to change with new technology, with being agile as an organization, as a company, or even as a family, I think that giving each other strong communication, redundant communication is good to get the kind of a sense of solid foundation. And then after that, there's a great book I'd like to refer people to called Who Moved My Cheese, which is all about change management and agility, which is once things start getting really difficult, let's say you can't find your toilet paper or whatever, then are you able to think in a way, to think creatively, think outside the box in order to survive and even to thrive in that new situation? And in some situations, maybe that thing is, hey, we're going to actually start using a lot more virtual teleconferencing software. It's always been around. It's not expensive and it works. So let's do it.
I thought you were going to tell me we're going to all use Totos and butt washers and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, GoToMeeting does not solve your toilet paper needs. I'm sorry. Thankfully, we all
bidets. Bidets for everybody.
That's right.
We're going to use the European model.
What was that, Logan?
There's a new product called Tushy. It's like under $100. You hook it right into your toilet and plug it into your water supply. It's like the cheap bidet.
That's right.
I saw that on Reddit. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to bring this full circle because it's interesting, Dad. You're asking us about teleworking and kind of the trends, but you're working in like the one environment that will never ever remote work, which is the ER. And
right.
So, and yet you're still going to see some changes here. All over the media, the public is being educated. If you don't have an emergency, don't go into the ER. If you have this symptom versus that symptom, use telemedicine, call your primary care doctor, do all these things so that you don't clog the ER and spread germs unnecessarily. So there's a public education campaign going on right now. So my question for you is, are you seeing some of the effects of that, and where do you think that's going?
You're absolutely right and wrong. Emergency.
My question can't be wrong. That's the question.
Well, no, the basis of it, it's the one place that is not going to be affected. It is already being affected, and that is that we've known, emergency physicians have known for years that half or more of the people in the emergency department don't need to be there. You know, that's the reason why we founded Telemedicine Magazine, because we wanted to pushing things.
But which half? But which half? That's the question.
That's the hard part. But the teletriage is not all that difficult. You know, you and I worked with Peck.
Tim Peck.
Tim
Call
Peck.
9. Mm-hmm.
Call 9, who was trying to essentially keep elderly patients out of the emergency department by bringing care to them. I think that you're going to see more and more of the pre-triage. Do you really need to come to the emergency department for that? Of course, when you crash your car, you know, when you have chest pain, you have abdominal pain, those things need to be handled by someone who can actually put their hands on you, who has, you know, some advanced testing modalities and things like that. But the fact is that I think that the 140 million patients that come to the emergency department could be reduced dramatically. And one of the major problems that we have is clogging. That even if you have a really significant issue, you might spend, a long time in the waiting room or hallway or whatnot. Yes, I think that this could actually benefit us, benefit everybody, because if you have the opportunity to call in and take a picture of your cut, take a picture of your throat, take a picture, there's all kinds of things we could say. Yeah, I'd like to take a little longer look, or take a more in-depth history or whatnot. But I think emergency medicine is going to really be impacted by this idea that not everybody needs to go to the ER. So,
do you feel like in your experience, I know you worked a couple shifts in the ER just this week, that people are being more selective? Are they triaging themselves a little bit and taking themselves to a different level of care?
I don't think.
No,
Not yet.
not yet. Yeah, I mean,
No,
that's rubber meets the road. Like, will people really do it? And will they actually use these services? I mean, I know there was a telemedicine teletriage experiment at Hopkins that I believe failed. It just didn't get the traction. The staffing was difficult for whatever reason. And there seems to still be this gap between what seems to be right and what seems to be a solution, and then what actually works in real life.
Yeah, I think that the only way that those services are going to actually be forced is that when you show up at the ER, if you are required to sit down at a kiosk and go through all the things you could have done at home in order to be triaged, instead of going in and seeing the nurse, if you actually have to go through that situation, and the end of that, they say, no, you don't need anything, or you can go on to your family doctor or whatnot. And once the first 5 million people realize I wasted my time going up there, then people are going to start to adapt to the new system. But frankly, right now, teletriage, telemedicine is just too new. People don't trust it yet. You want to talk to that doctor who sits down and deals with you there. And it's
Yeah.
not to say you wouldn't sit down and talk to, I mean, I could do that all day, every day, sit down there and talk to people and triage them and say, you need to go in, you don't need to go in. Because I'm old school. I talk to people. I actually take histories, and I don't just refer them over for tests. But
You make an interesting point, and Logan, you kind of hinted at this earlier when you said some of your startups are getting a lot of users during this period and getting a lot of exposure. They're doing this pro bono period. And Dad, you talked about how maybe you need 5 million users to try to validate a certain process or invalidate it. There's a term called DevOps, or developer ops, where if you're developing a new software product and you're working directly with the operators or the end users, you have to iterate very rapidly around their user experience to see if it's working. Because that user experience, once you launch your code or your product, that user experience is going to, kill your network effect pretty quickly if you don't include them in the process when you're developing. So let's say you launch an app for people to self-triage before they come in the ER. If it's a bad experience and they're convinced that they can go directly to the ER and not have to use the app, then of course the app's going to die on the vine. But if it's a great user experience, and it's got to be really great because people might be in pain, it might be an extreme situation, it's got to be a very rapid and very accurate. Then the word will get around, and you'll get that flywheel network effect where it grows and grows and grows. And we've seen that with certain apps, and it could be great, right? But sometimes things succeed even without that kind of great user experience because they're the only option. Some things get network effects or flywheel effects just because people have no other thing to go to. And you could try to force that. But as long as the ER is pretty easy to drive up to and run in the door, that's an easy button. That's an easy option. And the app is going to have to be pretty dang good to compete with that.
right.
I mean, I don't know how easy it is if the wait's like 4 hours. I mean, it can be pretty painful. But I understand
Getting in the door is easy.
it's simple. I don't know if it's it is easy and simple. You don't have to do you don't have
Right.
to know very much. You know where to go. The sign is big, it's bright, the entryway is wide, and you walk up, you talk to somebody. It is simple.
Right. And you feel like I mean, even though you may get annoyed and progressively more and more irritated as you wait, you, for the most part, feel like you're in a safe environment that if I wait here long enough, somebody's going to actually answer my question. And of course, we try to keep them in the dark, like saying, oh, it'll only be another 15 minutes, but it's actually going to be another 15 hours, before they actually get back to the back. It's shocking when you actually are backlogged and somebody in a position of responsibility like myself goes to the waiting room and announces, oh, by the way, it's going to be 5 hours before anybody gets seen. It is surprising who stays and who actually leaves. Surprisingly, a lot of people stay, and it's just easier to sit there and watch TV for 5 hours than it is to go try to find someplace else. Or they don't have an option. That's your point, Graham. They don't really
Yeah.
have an option. They can't get into
Yeah.
a doctor for 3 weeks or longer, and they could go to a minute clinic or something like that, but they don't trust them, and so it's
My
they stay here.
my theory about the slow uptake of teletriage and telemedicine in general, because with two small children, I've been thinking about trying to use it more ourselves and just kind of practice what we preach. And my theory is just that because we use this service so infrequently, we don't have the opportunity to create the habits that we need. So if I, as an individual, am only going to need teletriage for myself once every 5 years, how often will I really need to go into the ER as a 38-year-old, 39-year-old, 40-year-old? Hopefully not very often. I can schedule a GP visit once a year. Maybe there's a trip to the urgent care, not very frequently. And so apps change, they get updated. The technology just keeps changing. And so if I don't have a way to develop the habit, I'm going to be reinventing it for myself every single time. So
Yeah.
the user experience then has to be dead simple, and it probably has to be woven into something else that I'm already doing.
Yeah, and it
Well,
has to have a forcing function. Like, I think right now, I don't have any data. Maybe you guys have some data on this, but I would suspect that since there is, at least for a short amount of time, there is kind of a limitation on the number of tests available for coronavirus, that there is probably a huge spike in people trying to identify their symptoms through something like WebMD, right?
Sure.
So the web traffic around WebMD or some other similar kind of well optimized websites for self-prescribing or self-medicating are probably going through the roof right now. So if you had an app that was well marketed like that, maybe it would be doing really well right now, just because like I said, people don't necessarily have the option to go get tested yet. I mean, within a week or two, LabCorp and CVS might have all of those options readily available. But I bet you a lot of people who are at home, who are curious if their sniffles or whatever are coronavirus, are probably going online and trying to figure it out.
The actual problem, I get patients all day, every day who have Googled their symptoms, and they come in convinced they've got cancer, they're dying of heart disease, whatever. I actually believe that it's garbage in, garbage out. The problem is, of course, how the app is put together and how they're asking the questions and that sort of thing. I personally think that if I were sitting here, people could log on and actually talk to me, and I could look at them and such. I think that I could triage them a whole lot faster and more accurately than Google or WebMD or any of those others, because I would have a feel, I'd know how to rephrase the question slightly, because there's probably 50 different ways you can ask the same question and get a whole variety of answers. And so the programs are going to have to be a lot smarter than they are right now. Asking someone if they have a sore throat, I can't tell you the number of people that have normal throats who say they have a sore throat. And so I think that those have real potential, but I think the key is going to be putting a human face there. I think that's why I think telemedicine rather than programmed medicine is always going to be the way to go with that. I want to move on, and because there's two more big areas that I want to hit, and I've only have 15 minutes to hit it in. And you guys are business guys, okay? And I want to know some of your blue sky. Obviously, we're concerned that thousands could die or that whatever, but what kind of business opportunities do you think are going to happen as the fallout or positive sides of this? And I'll let you think about it while I throw my 2 cents worth in here. And that is, obviously, we've become medically dependent upon China, and it's widely known that 95% of our antibiotics and possibly throughout our medical pharmaceutical chain are either built in solely or in part in China. And China's actually had the gall to threaten to shut off all of our medications, at least maybe not officially, but some of their folks have said that. And I think that that's going to actually present an opportunity for huge expansion of pharmaceuticals in this country. And so I'm kind of excited. I'm actually waiting to jump on some of these with some investment money. So what do you think are the changes and opportunities that people might look at this when the smoke clears and say this is a new opportunity?
Well, I think, as I mentioned to you yesterday, that necessity is the mother of invention. And I think that we have to look to see what those business opportunities are. We have to look at what the actual necessities are. Some people tried to make money off of toilet paper in the last couple of days. They went and they hoarded a bunch and they tried to sell it out of the back of their trucks. That's not a real business opportunity. I don't think that's a real necessity that's going to be an enduring one. And it's a sad kind of approach, I think, to this type of situation, because I think there are real business opportunities that at the same time that they could create new markets, they could also create new livelihoods. They could create a prosperity. But
tell me something specific. I know that. I agree with you there. But be as specific as you can.
I'll be specific. So obviously, there's going to be plenty of innovation around telework, in medicine and other places, right? Also, remote delivery. You think about the fact that when everyone's holed up at home and they want to order that much more stuff from Amazon or Peapod or any kind of grocery delivery, if those things don't operate perfectly, it makes the possibility of some sort of other delivery service for a product, an actual physical product to your door, fresh water, fresh vegetables, diapers, whatever you need. If we go into quarantine and people are concerned about those things arriving and being sanitary, then some sort of sanitation check or verification system that says the products that you're getting are actually verified to be clean, or the same thing, like when somebody comes to your door with a Domino's pizza, do I know that the Domino's pizza guy didn't have coronavirus? Well, how do I verify that? There's going to be a company that can actually go around and, health check every single service and product provider.
That's true.
So in order to figure out where the opportunities are, you have to look at where the needs are and where the fears are. And you have to figure out how to ameliorate the fears, because that's where people are willing to spend their money, is to try to make their fears go away. And sometimes the fear is, I'm not going to have enough toilet paper, but sometimes the fear is more well-founded than that. And that's where we should be trying as a community to try to problem solve. It's like, how can we address those fears?
What do you think, Logan?
Yeah, I'll play my pragmatist role, and I'll give some examples that I'm seeing take off right now. Which is, the first category is at-home monitoring. So there's a couple companies I've been writing about recently that have just really fantastic ways of doing continuous monitoring at home, whether it's a really sleek watch that does pulse ox and everything. This company out of Israel called Oxytone, made for like an elder population or people with COPD, but if unleashed on a quarantine population, could funnel continuous data to the cloud and give smart alerts anytime somebody started to head in the wrong direction. So sort of quarantine tech with wearables another similar type company called Adar Health, where you breathe into sort of a breathalyzer and you get, 17 different vitals, including your lung function, which would be so important for COVID-19.
Yeah.
So getting some of these things in the hands of normal people, what does it cost? $300 to get one of these things. Breathing into it 3 times a day, having this constant sort of check engine light for your health, going straight to your doctor's record. These are starting to pop up in places like AARP. People over 70 are hot to keep track of their health. So I think some of these at-home monitoring devices are going to take off even more, and there's some really exciting stuff. Just both of those products, just FDA approved, just coming into the market. The second category are companies taking advantage of new health data sharing. So we've got a company that we work with called Particle Health, and they have really opened up the API to allow pretty much any company to use their API to access any patient's health records. So if you use the Particle Health API, let's say, Dad, you have your own little telemedicine company, you dial in somebody's first name, last name, date of birth. Within 1 minute, it accesses the vast majority, 80% of their records that are available through Epic, through Cerner. It's in your hands, ready for that visit. And so companies like Particle Health are enabling, they're the bridge company. They're enabling a new generation of apps and companies to safely utilize this HIPAA authorized data in order to bring you new services. So the analog is like Mint sort of opened up personal finance. It allowed me to access my Chase account, but it used an API service called Plaid. So this is the Plaid for healthcare. And I think the opportunity it's going to open up is not just in their company, but in the companies it enables, in the companies that it improves. And so all those extensions are going to get better, and the data that telemedicine companies are going to have is going to get better. So I think that's going to be huge. It's kind of a democratizing force. And then the third thing I jotted down here was just teleeducation, telementoring. As the schools shut down, everyone is kind of getting excited about like this experiment in teleeducation.
Tell a little bit about Theo's.
My son is particularly excited. He has already created his whole homeschool schedule. Every 15 minutes is blocked out. But, it got my mind thinking about, teleeducation and what that would look like. But at a healthcare level, telementoring, teleeducation cross borders where we can educate, telementoring in global health, I think that will be a huge opportunity as well. So at-home monitoring, data sharing, apps, and teleeducation, my 3.
A spinoff of that, actually, we have a healthcare conference scheduled now in Nairobi at the hospital that we helped be a part of building. And it's going to be one of those telementoring situations where American physicians will interact with, in some cases instruct, some cases not, but interact with Kenyan physicians. And that's all going to be enabled, as you know, remotely. And I think that kind of teleeducation is going to have applications to universities. For crying out loud, I've often wondered, why on earth are we sending kids off to spend $200,000 in some location when they actually could be in pods, smaller pods, get the small college experience that I got, that I really enjoyed, and still get the access to, if you will, the greatest minds, if you think that the universities are the greatest minds. But certainly I think teleeducation has that potential. I will say that.
Hold on one second. Just think about anyone who's been in a Zoom call or a GoToMeeting call, that knows that there's an intensity to it. You're locked into this conversation. And I'm comparing the experience of, imagine the conversation, 6 or 8 people on a call like this, compared to sitting in the back of your freshman class of 200, falling asleep. Like you're locked in when you're on a video call. So it would not only work, it would be in certain ways intensely better.
Yeah.
That's not new technology. I mean, we've seen small group online classes being run very effectively for the last 10 years in different industries. So I think just spreading that and democratizing that is a no-brainer. I think back to your earlier question, Dad, about what technologies might take off because of the forcing function of this virus. I want to say, because I was tech scouting for virtual reality for training for the last couple of years, I want to say virtual reality would be one of those that takes off, but I think we'll have to wait for the next pandemic for that to happen, because I think everybody needs to have the equipment in their hands when they get quarantined, and not everybody has it yet. But when I was at South by Southwest a couple of years ago, they were talking about what's it going to take for everybody to start using virtual reality. And you'd think that getting stuck in your home and wanting to experience other worlds or other neighborhoods or whatever experiences, virtual reality would be a natural outlet, when you're stuck in your living room. But not everybody has purchased the hardware yet. So we're waiting for, and one person said, we're just waiting for Apple to come out with a really great VR experience, because that would democratize it.
You're looking for
everybody would buy it.
Point.
If Apple made it, then everybody would buy it. And maybe that's the case. But once you reach that network effect of enough people having it, and then on top of that, you have another pandemic, probably not the coronavirus, but the next one, then everyone's sitting at home to say, well, maybe I could use this for this or that or this or that. And then the technology really takes off because they're stuck with it. Yeah.
And my last question, we've got 5 minutes, 3 minutes actually, but we'll take a little bit longer here. Both of you have either small children or, and Graham, in your case, teenagers. What do you think the impact of the pandemic? Juliet, Graham's daughter, was talking to us the other night about the fearfulness that has penetrated this younger generation as a result of being told that they're going to die from an active shooter, they're going to die from climate change, now they're going to die from a pandemic, and having kids be either cynical or paranoid. I want to know what you've got. Two different age groups here. You got the little guys. Logan, is that impacting them at all? And I know it's impacting your kids, Graham. What's your reaction to that, Graham?
So she used the words when we talked about it yesterday, that her generation feels like they're living in a simulation. And those are some words that I think have been borrowed from people like Elon Musk, that kind of have postulated that maybe we're living in a simulation, or this reality is not real. And I hear those words kind of echoed among kids that are talking about their experience. I think it's another way to say that this feels surreal. It feels a little bit outside of what they're used to, or a lot outside of what they're used to feeling. It just feels surreal, right? And I've challenged our kids, because we sat down and had a family meeting yesterday, and I said, I want you to take the next 2 weeks while we're at home. School's been canceled. You're going to have a lot of time to reflect. I want you to do something where you are creating a journal entry, a piece of art, something that you can look back on and think about this time, and think about what kind of person you want to be. Use this time, because every generation has moments where we look back and say, this is a common experience, whether it's 9/11, JFK, getting shot, landing on the moon, whatever it is. I don't think generations should be bounded by years. I think they should be defined by common experiences. And, these kids are going to remember the coronavirus as something that they went through together. So what does this mean for them? I think that if they're fearful of this, or they're fearful of other things, I don't think that we should define the generation as a generation of fear, but I think we should look back at the things that they were afraid of and say, how did that affect them as they developed and as they learned to overcome those fears? For my own children, I see them overcoming the fears, but it's all a part of a conversation that we have with them to look back on the past and not forget our history.
Logan, before you answer, your kids, Graham's kids are old enough to have a very analytical approach. Obviously, he's able to direct that in some fashion. And your kids, though, are going to have sort of a vague feeling, maybe nothing. Maybe they'll look back at it like we used to with tornadoes, and we would run for the tornado. We lived in Oklahoma when I was Theo's age, and when the tornado sirens would go off, we would all run back to the shelter and get down in there, all four kids, and mom and dad, and we had one little bunk bed. My mother would sit there at a table with a kerosene lantern, would jot notes about what was just kind of a diary, and my dad would look out of this little tiny, maybe 8x8 window at ground level and scanning what he could see of the sky and hoping, wondering whether a tornado was going to level the town because it was, in Tornado Alley in Oklahoma. I look back at that as a thrilling time.
Hmm.
I often wanted to walk out the next morning and see the house gone. I thought that would be so fun, if
Hmm.
everything happened like that. But I mean, on the other hand, some kids would have a generational fearfulness of
Hmm.
storms.
Yeah.
And so how do you think your kids are going to look back at some of these? Are they going to get that feeling of fearfulness?
That's an interesting, I don't know, you bring up an interesting point, which is this idea that I've felt before, of wanting to kind of clear the decks, kind of clear the um, have a clean slate in some way, wanting something really radical to happen, whether that just means sort of shaking up everything that you do. And I can imagine for you being a kid and just saying like, I want to come up and have all the houses gone, like what would we do? This sort of radical reinvention. So, Theo is 6.5, and I think he's holding some of the stress that he sees and feels inside of him, and doesn't know how to communicate it. And so, we'll see sort of as the days and years come. I think he's definitely old enough to remember this in the same way that, our papa, talked about the Great Depression and having little games that he played.
uh,
And so it'll be deep down there for him. But I think my comment is more around the role of social media in this, and the way in which it has fomented stress and anxiety. And Laura and I have talked about just kind of how stuck we have been to our phones during this period, and how difficult it's been to put them down, be in the moment. And I think that's the piece that we feel like we have to deal with emotionally, is figuring out how to be present in this, what's happening, and sort of make our own decisions about how to move forward, not react to what social media is doing, what the society is doing online, but to be sort of making our own decisions about our own family. So I think that's what's caused some stress. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be a generation of fear. I think that everyone goes through these different cycles.
well, I hope you're correct. Obviously, every kid's different, and as you can tell, my recollection of some catastrophic events maybe just self-selected me to emergency medicine. A guy who likes to run to the terrible happenings and then get something, feel something positive out of that. Well,
Hmm.
gentlemen, thank you so much. For our listeners, you can imagine what our dinner time talk goes to, hours upon hours, especially if there's been a little bit of social lubricant there with and I hope that you guys will join me again to talk about other issues that are you have a lot of expertise in your various fields that impact our listeners. So thank you, and for our listeners, thanks for joining EP Talk. And if you have questions for myself or Logan or Graham, join us at emergencyphysiciansmonthly.com, and or send your questions to mplaster@epmonthly.com. That's mplaster@epmonthly.com. Thank you for joining us, and have a good day.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.